We cannot prevent every tragedy. Enough talking about being tough on terrorism. Actually be tough on terrorism.
We just went from having the time of our lives to the worst night of our lives, all within a matter of minutes.
To all the LGBT people grieving today in Florida and across our country, you have millions of allies who will always have your back.
Because we are a family. It has been something that's been important to me since day one, is that we weren't just a place to work. You know, we worked together towards one certain goal, a certain mission.
Our goal as a nation must be to bring people together, to prevent violence, to prevent hatred, and to create the nation that we know, standing together, we can create.
It breaks my heart that in today's society that this still happens and people can't even go out of their homes and feel safe, and it's just a tragedy and it needs to stop. Everybody just needs to love one another, and this is horrible.
Good morning. It is Sunday, June 19th. I'm Veronica Cleary alongside Tom Fitzgerald from Fox 5, Bob Cusack from The Hill, and today we are joined by David Swerdlick, your assistant editor for the Washington Post Everything column. Thank you for being with us today. Well, today we are talking about the political implications of the Orlando nightclub massacre. Tom?
The president's remarks this week were both controversial and illuminating for a lot of people, especially coming out of the gun control debate, which has been going on in this country for years, which has been reinvigorated now because of this tragedy and this attack down in Orlando this week. There was also attention that was thrown at Donald Trump because of a tweet that he sent out, not only self-congratulating himself, but at the same time talking about the fact that the president is not saying the term radical Islam, which, you know, the president took on pretty head on. I think in the most direct address we've ever heard from him. Let's listen to that.
What exactly would using this label accomplish? What exactly would it change? Calling a threat by a different name does not make it go away. This is a political distraction. Not once has an advisor of mine said, man, if we really use that phrase, we're going to turn this whole thing around. Not once.
All right, well, that's the president this week. Now, it's not been an accident that the president hasn't said this. The president knows full well he said it. But the reason the president and the administration don't use that term is because they have been trying to not seed more of these ideas within the Muslim world, that this is some sort of United States versus a religion. So let me start with you. This phrase, radical Islam, is this somehow a distraction the way the president talks about it, or is there a conscious decision and a reason here why this term is not used?
I think you're right that it's deliberate on the part of the president, and that at this point he's sort of 8 years into his presidency, a little tired of having to address it. You could tell by the tone in that clip that you just played that he had an impatient tone. I think,
ticked off about it. He's tired of hearing it.
Definitely. I think it's for two reasons. Number one, it's really, in my view, not true that he has never used the term radical Islam. He has downplayed the term, like President Bush before him, saying Islam is a religion of peace, not blaming Islamic terror on all Muslims. But I do think that the president, if you go back to some speeches he made when he was running for president, if you go back to the 2014 prayer breakfast, he was very specific about what he views the threats. The other thing, I think, is that if you look at, and this is, you know, I think the inside view of the administration, if you look at other leaders, like, let's say, British Prime Minister David Cameron, who has forcefully come out and said the enemy is Islamic terror, but yet these other world leaders are not combating Islamic terror as forcefully as President Obama is. And I think
Bob, how do they throw the needle on this? Because clearly you can't live in a bubble and say that this has nothing to do with Islam. But at the same time, you can't just blanket coat everybody who follows this religion, with the same broad stroke. Is the president doing a good job of like what Dave was saying, is about pointing out that this is a minority with a religion, but maybe not so good in pointing out where its root is coming from?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it was very interesting. It was right after Hillary Clinton was asked about this term, and she used the term radical Islamism, which is not exactly the same. But I think she wanted not to be the headline. So then Obama really playing offense on this and going right at the story. But there is a bit of a split between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. Words matter. Politicians, what they say, we've seen it with Donald Trump. Words matter, and there's some nuance here with Democrats, and that's not a new thing with Democrats. And Donald Trump thinks, obviously, this goes to his strength. And we're not talking about Trump University anymore. We're not talking about the judge. We're talking about ISIS. But Republicans I talked to this week said Trump went too far by saying, congratulating himself, and also suggesting that Obama was tied to the terrorist. That's where Republicans shake their head, and that's why you're seeing the split in the Republican Party.
Language definitely matters. You're seeing a complete divide in how we address this. And another issue that came up this week, this conversation about gun control, we saw it with Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut leading this filibuster, demanding a vote for certain issues related to gun control, looking at this being on the terrorist watch list, expanding background checks. And one thing that maybe surprised some Republicans is that Donald Trump seemed open to this idea of no fly, no buy. We've got some sound from Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump talking about the issue, seeming like maybe they agree. Take a listen.
If the FBI is watching you for suspected terrorist links, you shouldn't be able to just go buy a gun with no questions asked. As president, I will make identifying and stopping lone wolves a top priority.
I'm going to be looking at it very, very seriously. The terror watch list and the no-fly list. I'm going to be talking to the NRA about that and starting a real dialogue.
So, David, when you heard this, is this something that Donald Trump, in many ways, that people look at his past, they say maybe he's even a Republican. They look at his history and some of the remarks that he's made. How does this affect him going forward with Republicans?
Well, I don't know if it affects Donald Trump as it affects conservatism and the Republican Party as writ large. As much as you say, Ronica, this is sort of one issue that highlights the whole tension between Trump, the nominee, and the party, right? The party position, the NRA position, the conservative position for a long time now has been this idea that, push back against any efforts to keep guns out of illegal gun owners' hands. And conservatives will say, look, just because you're on the no-fly list doesn't mean you've committed a crime or doesn't mean you don't have a Second Amendment right. Yet Donald Trump wants to look active and aggressive on terror.
And it's interesting just being open to looking at something. It does seem to somehow divide you. I think, it's a shame that more politicians aren't just open to a conversation. But I don't know. This is another example of Donald Trump just sort of being unafraid of just doing what he feels, what he thinks. He's not beholden to the party.
This tweet he sends out the other day, what was this thing, all right? Because, listen, this is the point in the race where we're not looking at these people as party nominees. We're trying them on for size as presidents right now, whether it's Hillary Clinton or whether it's Donald Trump.
And aren't we getting an amazing example of
what do we
that
want from our presidents
experience?
in our most dire times of tragedy? We want Ronald Reagan talking about the shuttle astronauts slipping in the surly bonds of Earth. We want somebody who can kind of unite us, center us, and move us forward. Do we want someone saying, high five to me, I was right about Islamic fundamentalism, radicalism? No. This sent the wrong note in every way, shape, and form. Donald Trump wants to be a leader on this. He's got to start getting out of primary mode and start getting into general election mode.
And
because this is going to be probably one of the worst 2 weeks Trump has had since this whole thing started. It started with the judge. This Orlando tweet last week and his subsequent statements about somehow the president somehow having involvement in it. This has not been a good half a month for Donald Trump.
He hasn't pivoted well. I do think on the terror list, that legislation was going to come up for another vote in the Senate. I think that's one area, and I agree with you, Tom, but one area that actually Trump is helping the party, because this This idea that you can get a gun while being on the terror list, that polls through the roof for Democrats.
But, at the same time, listen, I spent a lot of time, following the FBI briefings up on the Hill this week and with the Director Comey. How in the heck does the FBI interview this guy back in 2013 and 2014, and they don't follow up and check on him?
Yeah.
Senators and congresspeople were walking out of those briefings that I was at this week saying, I don't get it. We don't get it. Why would we be in a situation where somebody, when this news broke of who this guy was, had to be shaking himself saying, I know who this is?
There are a lot of people asking that question because it seems like, look, this was a case where it wasn't that we didn't know.
Right.
We knew something. Right. And why didn't the FBI do something? We actually have an article in the Post this morning talking about this by Glenn Greenwald, who is a pretty provocative, legal writer, who basically argues, look, in a free society, this is the challenge. You have a constitution, you have laws. If you open an investigation on someone like, even an actor like Mateen, and then there's no crime to be found, at some point the FBI has to close the investigation, as uncomfortable as that might be.
And Tom, it's a great point that you make, but hindsight is always 20/20. We can always look back and see it was so obvious or something should have been done, but this is just such a horrible tragedy, and it's good that we're pointing fingers. It's good that we're looking at that, so maybe we don't repeat those mistakes. But like you said, it is this discussion of constitutional rights. Where do we draw that line? I mean, even the NRA has come out and said, obviously, we don't want terrorists to have guns. It's about how do you get on this terrorist watch list? How do you get off of this terrorist watch list?
But it's not even clear if he was on a terrorist watch list at this point. And we're talking about people getting on airplanes. Let's bring it back to what this was. This guy was out in the weeds for 2 years. The FBI knew about him. Nobody seemed to revisit him or keep track on him. There were hard questions asked about who knew what after the Tsarnaev brothers,
right?
In the Boston Marathon. And we're not done with this in Washington just yet. There are going to be some hearings on how he was allowed to operate with impunity for 2 years before he popped up in that nightclub in Orlando. All right, this has led to another conversation this week. What it means to be Muslim in America right now. Donald Trump this week making some more remarks on that and what this means in the larger sense of what they would experience under the Trump presidency. We saw stunning, unfavorable numbers on Donald Trump this week amongst Latinos, amongst women. The fact is that whatever gap that exists before seems to be getting bigger and bigger every day. Does Donald Trump have any desire to bridge this? Let's hear what he had to say.
Well, look, I'm a big fan of the FBI. There's no bigger fan than me. But look, they've had better days, let's face it. They had him twice, and supposedly even a third time they were looking or thinking about it. And he was a bad dude. He was a bad guy. A lot of bad things said about him. And that was a big part of my speech. The Muslims have to turn people in. The Muslims, you will find out. Now, all sorts of things will be said about this guy, and people would say, oh, gee, why didn't we get him? They have to turn people in.
All right, they have to turn people in. There have been accusations this week that we are, unfairly, turning to the Muslim community every time something like this happens. I would suggest, though, that what Donald Trump said, although might be unpopular in some circles, if you can get through the bad dude part of it or whatever that was, there is some validity in what he's saying. That but are we making this situation worse with some of the inflammatory conversation that's been going on?
So, Tom, I think the harder question is, when you have situations like this, how do people within the Muslim American community, within Muslim communities in Europe, address the individuals within their communities who might become radicalized? But the easier question to answer is what you were talking about a minute ago about Trump's rhetoric, right? When you're talking about Latinos writ large, when you're talking about Muslim Americans, when you're talking about people of color, African Americans, there is a sense that Trump gives off in the way he addresses some of these issues, that he thrives off of an us versus them kind of friction or dynamic. Even in that clip you just played, he was saying the Muslims. You hear him say the blacks, the women, the whoever, and there is a tone that he projects that, whether it's intended or not, you can never tell what's in someone's head. You have this sense among many people that what they hear is we're not
not part of you.
We're not part of you. We're not fully American. It's us versus them.
Veronica, is there danger in that from an operational security standpoint, in that if you alienate this population that you're trying to get information out of, that you're trying to build a relationship with, and now you have just basically thrown up and saying you're all part of one group, doesn't that hurt you generate the kind of intelligence you need?
You know, it's an interesting point, and the theme that we're seeing come up this whole time is just this conversation about language. I found this poll done after the Brussels attacks by YouGov and the Huffington Post. It talks about cooperation or surveillance. It asks people, when it comes to preventing Islamist terrorist attacks in the United States, do you think it would be better to work with the Muslim community to identify potential terrorists, or subject that community to intense surveillance? You could argue that surveillance and working with that Muslim community might go hand in hand, but that language is very different. Working with the Muslim community, 63% support. Intense surveillance, 24% support. Language is important.
So that says Donald Trump is wrong.
Well, you know, according to I think that the language is crucial.
64% said say work with him.
Well, yeah.
Yes, that's my...
And that's part of the problem when you mentioned Ronald Reagan, is that Ronald Reagan was tough, but he also united the country in difficult times. And you mentioned Latinos, 89% unfavorable rating for Trump. I don't know how he comes back from that.
Those are killer numbers.
Are killer numbers, and it puts like a state like Arizona in play, and also endangers someone like Senator John McCain, who's up for re-election. So clearly,
John McCain's been endangering himself a little bit.
That's true. He got in trouble this week about saying that Obama was responsible for the terrorist attack, then backtracked. So, but overall, this is a real tough time for the Republican Party, despite this horrible attack. National security usually favors Republicans. You're seeing the Democrats far more united.
Well, David, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. Next, we want you to meet the Republican who is not backing Donald Trump. He's a little closer to home than you might think.
Sorry, so sorry.
A little Patsy Cline. Is that Patsy Cline? Patsy? Brenda, oh, that's right. Brenda Lee. Sorry about that. Welcome back to Fox 5 News on the Hill, folks. The reason we're playing I'm Sorry is because sorry for Donald Trump, but one of his supporters will not be the great state governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan. Now, he's been playing, Hogan's been playing a little coy. You talked to him about this,
Yes,
right?
I did. Remember, I said, who are you going to vote with? He said, well, I don't want to get in it. I'm not going to tell you to vote for, but vote with your conscience, because he wouldn't say at that time. And now I guess he's had enough people ask him who, and he said.
He was wasn't he getting a little prickly about it?
I'm not voting for Trump.
I mean, well, remember, he backed Christie, so I guess maybe Christie tried to call him. I don't know, but, and it didn't work. This is the second governor, Republican governor, who's now not backing Trump, Governor Baker in Massachusetts. So this is obviously a problem. This is a growing list of Republicans who are not backing Donald Trump. Hogan is someone who's a rising star in the party. Very few thought he would win his race, and he not only won, he dominated.
You're sitting next to the very few, because the day before the election, I didn't think he was going to win the race, and I've told the governor this himself, and he laughs heartily in my face every time I bring it up. This is a very Democratic state in Maryland. Hogan won, and is very, very popular in this state right now. How many more people does it become a tipping point where he's got, I don't want to go, into this coup thing in Cleveland.
Right.
But when does this get to be a real problem for him dealing with the GOP party? And there was talk of, if you don't support me, go away, be quiet this week from Donald Trump. Are there more Larry Hogans out there?
I'm sure there are more out there. I don't think it will hurt Trump in in essence. I think he is really one who's connected directly with the people, not really relied on traditional GOP support. But the interesting thing about Governor Hogan that I have to give it to him, it feels extremely sincere. It does not feel like a move because he leads a blue state. I don't want to get behind Donald Trump.
This isn't strategy.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and there, you know, there's something, if you look at Paul Ryan's, he seems so uncomfortable still with the endorsement, not endorsement, and releasing it during Hillary Clinton's remarks. There is something that I really respect, however you feel about what Larry Hogan is saying, about a politician who seems to be very true to himself, very true to his word, going with what he believes, whether it's politically found or not. And that's so unusual today. I give him some serious credit.
But it is amazing because I think a lot of these Republicans they want to say after the election, I told you so, I didn't back him. It's a stigma to some to back Donald Trump. And because they know eventually that could come back to haunt them down the road. Listen, Ted Cruz has not backed Donald Trump. And I thought a couple months ago he would. I don't think that's happening at this point.
I don't think Hogan is doing this for political reasons. I just don't think
he doesn't like
likes
him.
what he sees.
He doesn't like him. Yeah.
We're going to be right back. Coming up, the parent of the political implications of parenting on this Father's Day. Sunday, Fox 5 News on the Hill. We'll be right back. Stick with us.
Well, it's Father's Day, so of course we want to give a little shout out to our dads here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to my dad, too. Let's take a look back at some of the most memorable dad moments in politics.
According to some people who I don't know what business they have judging fashion, according to them, the president's not making the cut because of these jeans that he wore when he threw out the first pitch. What are you talking about?
They're kind of mom jeans.
I heard they were cracking on my jeans.
Dad jeans, called them nerd jeans. You were married to one of the most fashionable women in the world. Do you want to defend the pants?
No. Here's my attitude. Michelle, she looks fabulous. I'm a little frumpy. I hate to shop. Those jeans are comfortable. And for those of you who want your president to, look great in his tight jeans, I'm sorry, I'm not the guy. And I'm too sexy for my hat, too sexy for my hat.
She got to dress up Daddy in like this pink boa and these like big goofy looking underwear. And
FYI, that was on a videotape the whole time.
Uh-oh.
And now it's a class video that they're sending out to all the parents.
Oh, really? But it does.
I just want your extra time and your kiss.
Let's hop out of my space.
Good job. Good.
Kiss.
What advice do you have for President Clinton on the leadership qualities necessary to be a good granddad?
Be prepared to fall completely in love again. You're not going to believe it. You're just not going to believe the joy and the fun. And I'm looking forward to talking to you after that child.
Another grandchild for the Clintons yesterday. Thanks for joining us, Fox 5 News on the Hill.